I remember when we became African Americans because I worked in the black marketing department at Coca-Cola when we were selling Coke to our people. And the vice president came in and said, okay, we are now African Americans. We were like, alrighty, African. I heard this white woman was sitting next to me and she said to another white woman, they don't know who they are.
Wow.
That's what I said. And I'm going to take my wig off and I'll be honest, I did not know what to say to her. I didn't know what to say to her.
But in a way, it's kind of true, though.
That's why I didn't know what to say.
Yeah.
But African Americans seems to be sticking now.
Jeremiah 17:4. And thou, even thyself, shalt discontinue from thine heritage that I gave thee, and I will cause thee to serve thine enemies in the land which thou knowest not. For ye have kindled a fire in mine anger, which shall burn forever. Shalom Akim, Kahala Yahweh Bashem Yahushai, Bashem Kokodash. Double honors my teachers, the apostles and elders of Great Millstone. Peace and mercy to the elect, who are the house of David reborn again in this generation. And Shalom to the 130 Yasharallah, who today are known as the Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, who before losing our true heritage were known as, and still are, the true Hebrew Israelites of the Holy Bible. In today's lesson, we're going to talk about the video we just watched of those two Judean women giving a testimony of them not understanding or knowing who they are. And the scripture that I just read is the reason behind it. You see, let's go ahead and go to the Bible timeline. See, those two so-called African American women, they do not know who they are. As that woman said, right? African American seems to be sticking because they've been fed a bunch of lies, right? About where their history goes back to. You see, a lot of our people of the Southern Kingdom, they're taught that their history only goes back to their enslavement when they came over here to America, or what the Bible refers to as Babylon the Great, back around the 1600s. But the truth of the matter is, and which is a great secret hidden from the so-called Negroes or so-called African Americans, is that their history goes back to the beginning of our civilization, back to Adam and Eve. Because you see, the so-called Negroes, along with the Latinos and Native Americans, we are in fact, when you go back all throughout history, we go back to, you gotta go all the way back here, to the 12 tribes of Israel, okay? Making us the descendants that came from Abraham, Isaac, and our forefather Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, making us the 12 tribes of Israel, okay, that descend from his 12 sons. Now, the so-called African American, the so-called Negro, descend from his son Judah, okay, right, the Southern Kingdom. Well, Judah, Levi, and also Benjamin, okay. These are the three tribes that made up the Southern Kingdom way back when our nation had split into two. You can read about this in 1 Kings 12 and 2 Chronicles 10. This took place in 930 BC, right? After King Solomon died and he left his kingdom to his son Rehoboam. But unfortunately, Rehoboam was not able to keep the nation of Israel united, as it was a curse put out by the Lord, which would eventually hit the offspring of King Solomon, okay? And this is why the Lord divided our nation into two. Because why? Well, because he was going to eventually bring us down and make us go into captivity, which is what eventually happened to us. Hence the scripture I just read of Jeremiah 17:4, how we would lose our heritage. Well, history went on. The Latinos and Native Americans, the northern tribe of Israel, we eventually went through some hard times. You have the great famine that hit the northern kingdom that you could read about in 2 Kings 6:25. Then eventually you have the eventual enslavement and captivity of the northern kingdom, right? The beginning of its attempts you could read about in the book of Judith, which we were able to ward off the invasion by the mercy of the Lord, who he empowered one of our ancestors named Judith to go and slay the chief captain of the Assyrians called Heliophanes. But unfortunately that only gave us about a decade worth of time before the Assyrians would come back and eventually take the northern kingdom into captivity, which we stayed in captivity for about 100 years until the Babylonians came, destroyed the Babylonians, and then we eventually went free, but we decided to come over here to the Americas, right? This is ultimately what the Mormon religion is based off of. Well, onto the main topic, right? The eventual destruction of the southern kingdom, right? As these two ladies in the beginning of this video, this was the beginning of the downfall of the southern kingdom when they were first taken into captivity around 597 to 586 BC. It was about 10 years, right? 9 years that the expulsion of the southern kingdom to Babylon took place, right? You can read about this in 2 Kings 25, right? Where the three southern kingdoms, right? Levi, Benjamin, and Judah eventually got kicked out of southern kingdom of Israel and went into Babylon. Now eventually, this is where you hear about the stories of Susanna, Daniel, the three children, right? And then ultimately Cyrus, the king of Persia, released us, and then you also hear about Bel and the dragon, Daniel and the lion's den, and then the eventual coming back to Israel of the southern kingdom, right? The so-called Negroes or so-called African Americans, when they started to return to the land of Jerusalem, right? And they did so as vassals or as a tributary to the Persian Empire, okay? So when they went back without a declared king, right? You only had, de facto rulers, which was Zerubbabel. He was kind of think of him like the mayor, right? We all know he was King David in the reincarnation, and then you had the priest, which would be Ezra. Well, eventually, it continued to go on where the Edomites came into power. Let me just fast forward here in time. Back here, when Alexander the creep came onto the scene, he eventually came in and conquered Jerusalem, right? And by this time it was fairly easy to conquer. There was really no fight that took place. The Greeks at this time, the Edomites, were so large and so big of a force that there was really no way to fight them off. But eventually, when Alexander came into Jerusalem, the priests showed him favor and showed him where in the book of the law that he actually had been written about, right? And he showed him how he was prophesied to rule the entire world, and this ultimately ingratiated Alexander to us Israelites, right? And he allowed us to basically just go about our business, but just know that he was now our new ruler, right? Well, that's how, and again, this happened in 333 BC, that the so-called African Americans or so-called Negroes had then become, servants or basically, tributaries to the so-called Caucasian race, the Edomites, okay? Well, eventually, through history, the kingdom of Alexander was split up into his four generals, and then eventually what ended up happening is the Romans started to come into the scene, right? You got the famous guy, Roman general or Edomite general, Leo Scipio Africanus, went off and conquered Africa and named it after himself, right? His brother, Leo Scipio Asiaticus, conquered Asia, and that's where Asia gets its name, right? Named after his brother. You get the story of the Maccabees, where the so-called African or the so-called Negroes fought against the Caucasians, which were known as the Greeks at that time, and managed to regain control over the temple, rededicate it, and basically, garnered some respect and also some authority over the land of Judea. That went on for a while until the Romans came into the scene, right? This is where you get Julius Caesar, and then ultimately, after the killing off of the Hasmonean family, right, the Maccabees, you eventually had this devil Herod, who was a seed of the Edomites that had married one of the Maccabean daughters. Eventually, he came in and basically started to rule over our people, but he did so as a Roman. Okay, and this is where when Yahweh Shai, right, the Messiah, who the world ignorantly calls Jesus Christ, came onto the scene, and this is why when Yahweh Shai was born, right, Judea or Jerusalem was under Roman control. Now again, at this time, the African Americans, or the so-called African Americans and the so-called Negroes, dwelt in the land of Israel, in the land of Jerusalem, and they were the inhabitants. This is their original homeland, right? And they refer to themselves as Judeans or as the Israelites or Hebrew Israelites, okay? And then eventually, we all know what happened, right? The Messiah came, he started his priesthood. We hear about all these things where the Last Supper went on, the Messiah was crucified, the Messiah was resurrected, and he returned back to heaven. And then eventually the apostles went on to teach, spread the word, and spread the truth how we were now redeemed back to the Father. Paul gets converted, but eventually in 70 AD, this is where the main destruction took place, right? You had over about 40 years, you had the building up of the understanding that we were now redeemed, right? That the Messiah had come, gone, gave up his life to redeem us. And this caused a lot of rebellion and uprisings within our people, the so-called African Americans, the so-called Negroes, to rebel against the Roman powers. When that took place, the Roman Emperor Titus and Vespasian basically decided to cut off Jerusalem, for good. Okay, and this is where they came in 70 AD and destroyed Jerusalem. We could read about this in the Chronicles of Josephus, who was a Levitical priest, and he was for the most part the de facto ruler of Jerusalem during this time. Now they spared his life. The Flavius Roman family saved his life and basically spared him and took him in, and he eventually went on to write his many books, which were basically chronicles of who us Israelites were. And these books basically were used to introduce us to the greater world, or the greater Roman world, that had not really known of who we were or what we worshipped, or what we were about. That's why when you read these books, Josephus goes through our history. He basically does a retelling of the Bible, and he also ultimately breaks down the destruction of our place. And this is how we know what eventually happens. Now, one of the things that he was able to write was this. Let me go ahead and read this real quick. This book here, Babylon to Timbuktu, by Rudolph R. Windsor, draws a lot upon the Josephus Chronicles. Now, let me go ahead and read you a tidbit out of this book, which is very telling of what happened to the Judeans, or the so-called Negroes, or so-called African Americans during the time of 70 AD. It says, in the year 65 BC, the Roman armies under General Pompey captured Jerusalem in 70 AD. General Vespasian and his son Titus put an end to the Jewish state with great slaughter during the period of military governors of Palestine. Many outrages and atrocities were committed against the residue of the people during the period of Pompey to Julius. It has been estimated that over 1 million Jews, right, or should I say 1 million Negroes or African Americans fled into Africa, fleeing the Roman persecution and slavery. The slave markets were full of black Jewish slaves, or again, black Negroes, black African Americans. And this is ultimately what happened to our people. They were scattered all over the world. Those who managed to escape the destruction of 70 AD there in Jerusalem fled down into Africa, just like our forefather Abraham, just like our forefather Jacob, and then also our ancestor Yahushua, right, the Messiah. When he went down there with his parents, they fled down there, and they ultimately dwelt on the west coast, mainly on the west coast of Africa. Now, they were all scattered all over the Africa, but for the most part, you had large communities of Southern Kingdom Israelites, right, the Jews, on the west coast of Africa. So now that we understand that the so-called Negroes or so-called African Americans, whose true names or true identities would be the Jews or the Southern Kingdom of Israel, had dwelt as refugees for 1,500 years in Africa, we got to understand that there were two different type of so-called black people in America, right? Really, there's more than two, but primarily it's broken up into two, because one of the big lies that Esau likes to say is that blacks sold blacks into slavery, but that's a bunch of lies. You see, the native inhabitants of the land of Africa are the descendants of Ham, which you see here on the left, right? These would be known as Hamites, right? Or, they also used to be referred to as the Canaanites, right? Basically the descendants of Ham. Okay, these are the true Africans, right? At the bottom of these, on the left side, you can see these are the customs of the Hamites, right? They're the ones that take piss showers, they drink blood, they do female genital mutilation, child sacrifices. That's their whole credo, right? That's their thing. Now, on the opposite side, this is where you have the Jews, the so-called Negroes, the so-called African Americans, the Israelites of the Holy Bible. Okay, these are the true Jews which the Bible speaks of, right? These are the people which King David comes from, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Yahushua, the Messiah, the prophets. These are of the same stock. And as you can see in the lower right corner, right, the heritage that these people go back to. You got here the Roman Emperor Septimius Severus, Emperor Constantine the Great, right? King James of the King James Bible, right? And then you got the Saint Baal and Saint Gregory and Saint John from the Holy Roman Empire, okay? This is the lineage of the so-called Negroes, the so-called African Americans, okay? Those terms are bywords and derogatory to these people, right? Their true identity are the Jews, right, of the tribe of Judah. These are Judeans, or again, Southern Kingdom Israelites, right? Or just plainly Hebrew Israelites, right? And what you're looking at here with Spud Webb and Matumbo, this is like an example of like King David and Goliath, okay? Because again, these people here on the left, the true Africans, this is where Goliath came from, right? And Matumbo is of the same stock which Goliath came from, right? The same people. To just give you an idea. Now let's go and read this here. Let's zoom in. Oops, a little too much. But what does it say here? This is from the Bible, the Compact Bible Dictionary, the Zondavans, right? It says, Ham, the youngest son of Noah, born probably about 96 years before the flood, and one of 8 persons to live through the flood. He became the progenitor, right? Basically the forefather of the dark races. Not the Negroes, but the Egyptians, the Ethiopians, the Libyans, and the Canaanites. Okay? So there you go, right? See, because the Negroes, they descend from Shem. Because why? Well, because they are the tribe of Judah. Okay? This is Hosea 4 and 6. My people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. Because thou hast rejected knowledge, I will also reject thee. That thou shalt be no priest to me, seeing thou hast forgotten the law of thy power, I will also forget thy children. Now eventually, us Israelites, both the northern and the southern kingdom, we eventually forgot who we were, right? As a curse that the Lord put on us, that we would forget our heritage. Now, how did that happen? Well, because we went into captivity. And our masters, they didn't bother educating us on where we came from or the great history of our people, right? In fact, they try to hide this from us and erase it from all memory, right? And it's so funny. One day I'm going to find a scene, but we've all seen like these type of scenes in movies where you have the bad guy telling the hero that he's going to erase them from memory and that nobody will ever remember their name, right? That's ultimately what happened to us Israelites. See, these devils, they tried to erase us from history, right? So much so that they were able to get rid of us as a people, but they couldn't get rid of the Bible or of the great stories or the great history of our people. So what did? Well, they went ahead and co-opted our heritage and our history. And that's why today you have the people over in the land of Israel today, the Israelis, claiming to be us, right? They're claiming to be the chosen people, but ultimately when you get into their own history that they've documented and they've spilled the beans on, they go back to the line of Esau. Okay? But again, this is all starting to come out now. This is Romans 10:2. For I bear them record that they have a zeal of God, but not according to knowledge, right? And that's our people, right? When you look at all the people of the world, the Negro, Latino, and Native Americans, we're the most pious and religious people upon the face of the earth, right? We dominate the charts and the statistics for the people who go to church the most, right? We're the most superstitious, the most religious, and the most God-fearing people on the face of the earth, okay? But unfortunately, we're still following the lies which our masters, our old captors, had taught us in captivity, right? And our people are pushing those truths today, right? This is where you get your religion from. This is where you get, black churches or, Catholicism, Christianity, Protestants, Baptism. All religions were a result of trying to make sense of the lost heritage of the Negro, Latino, Native Americans when we became a lost people, and we, all through our scattering, the diaspora of our people.
But who else are the real Shemites? There are other anti-Zionist, non-Ashkenazi, Torah-keeping Jews worldwide that are the true Shemites, just like the Yemenite Jews and the black African Shemites. And I most probably shouldn't go here, but I will anyway. You see, after the destruction of the temple, yes, many of the Jews, the poor Jews, remained in the land, but there was a migration as well of the more affluent Jews to Yemen and to other parts of Africa. You see, the black African Shemites were actually then taken away in slave ships. Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 68. And who were the owners of these slave ships? Who were the biggest slavers in the 16th century? The Ashkenazi were the biggest slavers in the 16th and 17th century, going into the 18th century. You see, Ashkenazi slaving was huge. This is from, I have to be careful when I say this, so my sources, it's always best to go with Jewish sources, right? Because you just trod on a bunch of toes. So we'll go with the Jewish sources. There's a ton of sources out there, but I'll stick with the Jewish ones because that's just safer. The Jewish scholar Jonathan Shorshak says this: Jewish merchants routinely possessed enormous numbers of slaves temporarily before selling them off. If a slave auction fell on a Jewish festival, it was postponed due to lack of buyers and sellers. The Jews of Suriname gave their slave plantations Hebrew names such as Machanaim, Nachamu, and Goshen, Rabbi Herbert Bloom adds that the slave trade was one of the most important Jewish activities. In 1694, Jews owned 9,000 African Shemites. Jewish slaving is in fact confirmed by the Jewish Encyclopedia. So in the days that we live, there's nothing more important than this Melchizedek message to the true Shemites. Because this Melchizedek message of the true Shemites is the solution. It is the solution to the Palestinian problem. It is the solution to the Black Lives Matter that is being fomented by the synagogue of Satan. It is the solution to racial tensions, segregation that is all part of the synagogue of Satan's plot for Yahweh's people to fight amongst themselves based upon the color of our skin. That is ridiculous, but that is what they want so that we keep our minds off of them as the true slavers of Yahweh's people.
So there you have it, right? A testimony of who the so-called Negroes and the so-called African Americans are today, right? You are the Israelites of the Holy Bible. You are of the tribe of Judah, the tribe of Benjamin, or the tribe of Levi, depending on where your father's lineage goes back to. And that right there fulfills this prophecy. This is Hosea 1:10. Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured nor numbered. And it shall come to pass that in the place where it was said unto them, Ye are not my people, there it shall be said unto them, Ye are the sons of the living God. Right? Because you see, right here in the land of America and pretty much all around the world, we're not told that we're the Israelites, right? Not until, recent times. We were always told that we were Negro, Latinos, and Native Americans, right? We were, wetbacks, Negroes, black, all these, Apache, or all these different names, right, were given onto us. All these bywords, which is also another biblical curse that was prophesied to fall upon us. Now, eventually, the sad part is that only 1/3 of our people, that's 1 out of every 3 Negro, Latino, Native Americans, are going to come to the realization that this is the truth, right? They're going to be led to the awakening of their true heritage, and they're going to come back to our true heritage, right? But 2/3 are going to continue to go on living lives as African Americans, so-called black people, so-called Negroes, right? And then eventually they're going to end up being put to death. Why? Well, because the Lord has nothing to do with them, right? Other than to, sanction them for destruction. And they'll eventually come back in the kingdom through reincarnation. But because they've decided to reject this knowledge, the Lord is going to reject them. So again, if you've stumbled upon this video, or if you've basically been watching these videos and gathering information, hey, it's time to get right with the Lord. It's time to really put an effort into learning your true heritage, because this is the truth. This is what is going to save you from the coming destruction, which is soon to hit the earth. Right? So hopefully this video was edifying. Until the next time, I want to give all honor and glory and praises to Yahweh, Ba'Shem, Yahushai, Ba'Shem Rukak Radash. Double honors my teachers, the apostles and elders of the great millstone. Peace and mercy to the elect. Shalom.